Quit porn now because your life depends on it. I'm Dr. Trish Leigh. Let me tell you what I mean by that. All right, I know what you're thinking. That aren't I being just a tad melodramatic? And the answer is no, because I work with so many people whose lives are shattered because of their porn addiction, which begins as a porn habit. So follow me here, and I'm going to talk about three things in this video. Number one is how a porn habit becomes a porn addiction and where the danger is somewhere in the middle, which leads to number two is a dysregulated brain pattern that keeps pushing you back into the screen while it pulls you in, which leads us to number three. All right. How can my life possibly be ruined? If you're nowhere near the brink of that right now, then I get how you can't fathom what I'm talking about. But I know that there's many people out there that are on the brink, or unfortunately, they've crossed over into all the bad things that can come when a porn addiction escalates. And that's what we're talking about. Okay, so let's get back to number one. Number one is, how do the seeds of addiction become watered and grow over time and move into a bigger and stronger and more of a grip of an addiction that can point you over the edge into the gulch and have a world of hurt be waiting for you there. All right. So you probably found porn when you were young. Likely it was in childhood or adolescence, and it made your brain feel good. That feeling was that big dopamine deluge, the flood of dopamine that was pumping through your system. Now, dopamine is the pleasure-seeking neurochemical in your brain. It's the neurochemical of motivation. So it's linked to the thing that you experienced when your brain was flooded. And we know that porn is a supernormal stimulus. It gives your brain so much dopamine that it feels amazing. So what happened when you were young is your underdeveloped brain got this flood of dopamine and it linked it in terms of motivation back to the screen, back for more. Those were the seeds that were planted in those first few exposures. Now, if you continue to water those seeds over time, what happens is you will begin a habit that then moves into consistent use, which leads to misuse, using porn too much, and masturbation, don't forget about that, which leads us into abuse, which then tips over into addiction. And primarily this is accomplished by frequency, consistency, and especially an increase in intensity of the porn that you are consuming. So what happens is you need more and more intense porn to get the same feeling than you did before. That's because of tolerance building and escalation of the habit. You need more to feel good. Eventually, you need more to not feel bad. And that's when use tips into misuse and abuse. Abuse means now your brain is dependent upon porn to feel okay because you've created a dopamine deficit in your life. So if you're noticing that you don't get joy out of the things in your life that you should, happy moments, wonderful moments with your family or with your honey or in your work when you do something satisfying and you should feel that warm glow inside and you don't, you feel numb, that's because you've taught your brain that all the pleasure is in the screen. So it can no longer find pleasure and happiness out in your life. That's when you know you've tipped into misuse and abuse and compulsion and dependency. So what that means is you're bordering, if not already in the realm of addiction. And what addiction means is you're dependent upon that behavior to not feel bad in your life. And you have to go back into the screen, which is pulling you back because it's a supernormal stimulus. All right. That's number one, seeds of addiction and where this whole thing goes to. So what happens in number two is that when you're young, your brain is operating in the optimal brain pattern, the green zone, as I call it. I can see this on people's QEEG brain map. So I do brain assessments all the time. If you're interested, go to my website, drtrishleigh.com. Under the personal neuro coaching tab, look for QEEG brain map. You can read all about it there. But what I can see is when you're young, your brain is in the optimal mode. When you find porn, it changes the way that your brain operates. It changes your general modus operandum, your MO. And what happens is you're no longer using the green zone. Now, as you water those seeds, you start using what I call the pendulum effect. Too much fast speed, too much slow speed simultaneously. You can see it on that page on my website. There's visuals that describe it to you. But what happens is then your brain needs to be calmed down and stimulated simultaneously. And I'm sure you probably feel that. That's what the screen does for you because you've taught it that over time, watering the seeds. So this pendulum effect brain pattern needs the dopamine deluge to feel good. And on the webpage that I just talked about, you can see that when you get the dopamine deluge in your brain, you're flooding it out with couch mode. That's why you feel good after you've had a porn session, but eventually you feel bad again. Dopamine deficit. So that brain pattern is what is called a neurologically dysregulated brain pattern. And what that leads to is difficulty self-regulating, if not impossible to self-regulate. Self-regulate means when you feel bored or you feel stressed or you feel bad, you can handle it. You have healthy ways to handle it, and you can collect yourself and do what you need to do. But if you're dysregulated, that self-regulation is impaired. So you feel stressed, you feel bored, you go back into the screen, or you masturbate to feel better. You flood your brain with that dopamine chemical to feel good for the moment, but ultimately bad again. That's the dysregulated brain pattern. Okay, so let's move on to number three. Is that what happens then? What happens is now, when your brain is in that pendulum effect, but then it's artificially getting the dopamine that it wants, and then it's going back big time to the pendulum effect, you are dependent upon the screen and masturbation to feel good ever because of the dopamine deficit in your life. So the more frequently and consistently you go into the screen, the more you have to. Now, the more intense of porn you're watching, it may be violent, it may go out of your moral boundaries, it may involve more people, it might involve more outrageous scenarios, but the more of that you get, you're getting this more intense feeling because it's dumping more dopamine into your brain. Now, what it's doing is desensitizing the reward center in the middle of your brain, and it's decreasing functioning in your frontal lobe, which is impairing your judgment, making it difficult for you to make good decisions, make it difficult for you to exercise executive function in the world, and the desensitization is making it so that you inherently need more. More is the code of a dopamine dependency at higher and higher levels. It can never be satiated. That's the idea of it. It will always keep you chasing down more of that bigger feeling. So what happens is now, if your brain's been flooded out by this dopamine for so long, you no longer can sense reality from fantasy, or your hold on making good judgments becomes impaired. And this is when people get themselves into trouble or they get caught, because you no longer have the brain power to be able to be vigilant. And so many people have told me, my wife walked in and I didn't even care. And that's what's called the narcissistic bubble. And that bubble is because your brain is flooded with dopamine constantly from frequent, consistent, and intense porn. So what that leads to is now you're out in the world and somebody looks at you and you think, because of the scenes you've been watching, that this is going to go down like porn, except for that's not reality. That's fantasy. And what this leads to is infidelity. It leads to promiscuity. It leads to making advances towards people who don't want it, which borders on sexual misconduct. It will lead to sexual assault. If you look at all of the bad sexual assault articles that have been in the news, you can trace them back to porn and sex addiction. I was doing that for a little while, but it was disrupting my ability to be in that optimal mode because I feel for those people. There's been countless of them, people who've harmed other people. We know that sex trafficking and human trafficking and, using those types of people all comes from impaired judgment in this bubble where it's narcissism. Those people are there for my pleasure. And it's because of the brain mode. No healthy individual would choose those things. No healthy individual would perceive those things. So I work with people who've cheated on their wives and they didn't want to. Inherently, they love their wives. They don't know how they got there. And I get the call, people are in tears and they're like, I have no idea why I did that and how I got there. And I say, I know. It's the bubble. It's the dopamine. It's the pendulum effect. It's the dysregulated brain. So save your life. Quit the habit now before it becomes misuse and addiction, compulsion, and dependency. If you're already in a place of the things that I'm talking about, get into my 90-day program so I can help you get out. If you need proof and you want to see it in your brain, likely I can show you it. Sign up for an assessment because I know those brain assessments are having huge power to show people this is because your brain's flooded with dopamine. This is because you're stuck in the pendulum effect. It's time to change, my friend. Not tomorrow, today. It will save your life. It will save you a world of hurt that might have come towards you. So let's do this. Get into my 90-day program if it feels good. Get a brain assessment so I can show you how your brain can improve. And let's not wait another day. Your life depends on it. All right, remember, control your brain or it'll control you.